So I'm going to get started with my flower sack study. For this one, we want to use the full HD. Because I'm on the projector, I don't have as much resolution, so I'm going to open up the more presets and go with just regular HD. And I'm going to change my frame rate to 24. So make sure to remember to update your frame rate. And now we have a new scene. And so I'm going to start by adding a little ground plane just to give a sort of like little reference to the scene. So I'm going to change my layer 1 to ground. And I'll just choose a brush. I make it a little wider, like 4. And let's just draw our little ground plane. That looks pretty good. Oh, my smoothing is set back to, I like to have the smoothing a little bit lower so we get a little bit more of a natural hand feel. That might be actually like too, let's do something like that. Okay. So I'm going to lock this, and I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to call this my pose to pose. And this is eventually going to be a guide. I'm not going to make it a guide quite yet because I might want to preview it or something. But eventually this will be a guide. And this is where I'm going to kind of like work out my main keyframes for my motion. As I mentioned, morning. I'm going to do surprised. And so I'll just kind of work it out. I'm not going to storyboard. That's something that we'll get into soon. I would usually, like if I was creating a full animation, I would storyboard out all the main kind of like points of the animation. But this is still just a study. So we're still just going to kind of work with some keyframes and just kind of make it up as we go. So I might change the color of my brush. To something, since eventually this is going to be a guide, I might want to use like a blue color. And I'm going to actually make the stroke a little bit smaller. I'll go with maybe 2. Actually, I might even do like 1. Because when I'm making this guide, I want to be like very sketchy. Hey, Ralphie, I'm sorry, could you keep the noise down, please? It's okay. I'm going to start just really sketchy. I'm not going for like a perfect drawing. What I'm going for here is just like finding where the specific parts or the specific motions are. So for my flower sack, I want to start with just some stasis. I don't want to start mid-motion because I want to be able to kind of, create the emotion. So I'm just going to start with some basic stasis, and I might kind of like use some different like lines to kind of like add weight to different parts, and kind of like pull down different parts just to kind of get a sense of the volume. When I go back later, I'm gonna draw over this to make the actual different frames. And then we kind of pinch up here for the parts of the flower sack, and then all the flower is gonna kind of drag this middle part down. So we're just gonna, that's gonna be kind of our first sort of like just stasis frame. It doesn't have to be super in depth, but we just kind of want to get the volume, get a sense of where the flower sack is starting off. So then, of course, I'm gonna hit F7. When I'm doing my keyframes, some people will like stretch out their keyframes, so they might like move their playhead up to here and then hit F7 here. You could do that, but when I'm doing the keyframes, usually I can save some time by just hitting F7, and then I can always like space out the keyframes later. So I'm not gonna spend time spacing it out. I'm gonna make my keyframes, then I'll get a sense of how long I want the animation to be, and then I'll add in my breakdowns later. I am gonna turn on the onion skin, which I can click the button here, or I can hit Alt-Shift-O. And so we're going to use the onion skin, obviously, as a reference for our previous animation. So I'll probably leave the sack like this for a while. So maybe I'll add another beat where nothing really changes, just to kind of, keep that stasis. So it's like basically exactly the same. Just leave that. So we're just adding a beat. It's just saying like, this is normal, this is stasis, nothing's happened yet. And then I want to do surprise. So I think what I'll do is I'll have the sack kind of like looking around a little bit, so you get the sense that it's like looking for something. And then it'll like jump in the air and fall down or something like that. So let's have the sack look over to the left for a second. We'll just draw the attention to the left. So I'm just going to kind of bend this over, and this is going to bend down a little bit. We might shift the weight a little bit this way. So we might have a little bit more weight here. And so this will kind of bend like this, and maybe this will go up a little bit, something like that. We're just kind of like moving the sack over. And then if I want to see what that looks like, this is why I haven't made this a guide yet, because one of the things I can do to preview this is just do the Control Enter, and I can just take a look at what it looks like. Okay, that's fine. I'll hit Control W to close, and that's good enough. That gives us a sense of what's happening. I haven't saved yet, so it's always good to save while we're working. I'm not going to save to my desktop anymore because it seems like that gets wiped pretty often, but it does seem like my files and documents actually stick around. So I'm going to start using that instead. I'll make a new folder here and call this Annie260. And then I'll just go in here and I'll call this flower study. Okay. So we're looking over there. I'm going to do another very small movement here. So he kind of looks, but then we have a beat of we're just looking. So I might relax the flower sack a little bit. Blue is maybe not the right color for this because of the onion skin. I wonder if I can change the onion skin color. Okay, let's change it. Let's make the onion skin pink. Okay. That'll make it a little easier to see what's going on. Okay. So we're going to relax a little bit. So he looks over here. But then he doesn't see anything. So he relaxes a little bit, but he's still kind of looking over in that direction. I made him a little too small here, so we want to make sure to keep the volume intact. So we're relaxing a little bit, but then suddenly we're going to look at the other side. So we're going to snap over here. So he's going to completely reverse over here. We're going to stretch this out a lot to show that movement, and then this will go over this way. So these are just like my main poses. I'll add breakdowns into this later. But we're just kind of like snapping back, and then we're going to repeat that motion again where he kind of doesn't see anything and he kind of relaxes a little bit. And then we're going to relax a little bit more in the next frame. So we'll go almost all the way back to our original stasis frame. And of course I could, just copy that and paste it if I wanted to, but I might as well just draw it. It's probably just as quick. So we're back to stasis. Let's take a look. It's a little too fast to really see what's working. So that actually might be a good reason to add a few frames in here. Morning. Anyway, so we're back to stasis, and now we're going to have our big surprise. So we'll just have him like jump way up in the air. So he's really, really surprised. So we're just going to like really go from just looking, and then a big surprise. So we'll really exaggerate that motion. So I'll kind of like stretch his arms out as much as I can, and he still is going to have some weight down here, so it's not going to be like he's fully up in the air. So he still has some weight down here. His arms are stretched out, and he may be even farther back than this. I'm just going to erase that. So I'm just hitting Control Z a little bit. We may not even want to overlap at all with this this previous frame. So we'll just drag this down a little bit, add a little bit of our volume back in here, pull this out. There's going to be some stretching obviously here. We're just like basically working this out. So we've got our big surprise, then we're going to like fully extend as much as possible, and his like flower sack part will be like that. So we fully see the surprise, and then let's just make him like flop over backwards. So we'll go to a new keyframe. Then he's fully surprised. The weight of the flour sack, so most of the weight of the flour sack is always going to be on one end or the other. If you pick up a flour sack, like all the weight's going to be down there, and then if you pick up the other side, it's going to flip over. So the weight has more inertia. So if it's moving in one direction, it's going to want to keep moving in that direction, whereas the other side of the flour sack doesn't have as much weight. It can flap around and do different things. Okay, so so the inertia now is like going like this. And so we're going to keep moving the weight up here, but now the edge of the flour sack is going to kind of start to go this way. He's going to kind of flop over, and so we'll put his little feet like this, and we'll start to get him kind of like going over this arc like that. We'll just do a couple more, and then we'll space out the animation a bit, and then we'll do some breakdowns and keyframes later. So now we're going to snap. So this main flour sack part is still going in this direction. So we're going to snap it all the way over like this. And so his feet will be up here, and then his arms will be like that. So we're going to flip him all the way over from one frame to the next. We'll see how that looks in a second. We might add a few more keyframes in there, but that should be pretty good. And this should actually probably swing over that way a little bit. So maybe I'll just erase over here a little bit. Again, it doesn't really matter if this looks good. We just need to get the main motion down, and then we're going to draw on top of this a little bit later. Okay, so now we're completing this arc. So now our feet are going to be down here, and our sack part is going to be here, and his arms are going to be kind of stretched out like this. And then we're going to flop on the ground. So here we could like make him suspend in air for a second. That might be kind of funny, or we could make him just like flop straight down. You can play with the timing at various points. It doesn't have to be 100% realistic. So I'm going to kind of flatten him out here, like he's almost like he's suspended in air, and then I'll just smash him on the ground. So we'll get a little bit of a comedic effect there. So the next frame, he'll just be plop on the ground. And since he's a flour sack, he's going to have more volume up here, and this will be kind of flattened out. He might need to be a little, I think I made him a little too small here, so I might stretch this out a little bit, bring this down a little bit. So that seems pretty good. And then maybe at the very end, we'll flop him down a little bit more and just kind of flatten him out like that. And then maybe at the very end, for a last little bit of reaction, we'll have him flip his head up like this and try to look again at what was over there. So we'll kind of flip his head up. We'll be looking at this direction. And, you know, this is a bunch of different motions. You don't really have to do that much. I'm just kind of like making up stuff as I go along. But this will give us a little bit of a sense of what it's going to look like. Let's preview that. So that seems kind of decent. Let's add some frames in here. So usually what I'll do at this point is I'll go back in and say, how many frames did I create? I created 17 frames. And so then I can say, well, how long do I want my animation to be? I can do some basic math. Let's say I want a 3-second animation. I'll say 3 times 24. That's going to give me how many total frames I need. And so I have 17 keyframes. So if I divide the total frames I need by the number of keyframes I have, that gives me 4.2 per frame. So I'll go back and I'll just add 4 and see what that timing looks like. So I can go frame by frame, and again, I just use F5, and I'll just go and hit it 3 times. So it'll add 3 more frames to each keyframe. So this, I think, personally, this is easier for me to do this next, but some people will do this as their keyframing. Of course, it kind of depends on what you're working on. Like if you already know how many frames you have to get to, you may want to do it in advance, but since we're just kind of doing it from scratch, it's just a study, this is probably what I'll do. Okay, let's make the timeline a little smaller. Okay, let's see how that looks now. And so now we can get a sense of, do we need some extra beats? And I think we do need a couple extra beats. Like he looks, and then he should wait a little bit longer. So what I can do is I'll just add in a couple beats here. So I have stasis, stasis, looks to the right, relaxes, and that's where I think I need an extra beat. So I'll put F7 there, and I'll just keep them almost in exactly the same place, but we're just adding an extra beat of stasis. And by having this a little bit slower, of course, it'll emphasize on the other end when things start to speed up how fast it gets. Okay, so then let's add another beat of stasis here. So maybe just kind of in between these two frames. And there we go. Of course, I would spend a lot more time kind of like adding in frames, checking the timing again. Does that seem like it makes sense? Go and revise until I get something that I like. Once I get something that I like, and this is where we'll stop this part of the demo, I'm just going to turn this into a guide. So this is now a guide. It won't appear in our export. And now I'm going to create my new layer, and I'll put flower sack here. And I'll select a new brush, and I'll go through and I'll add my keyframes and my breakdowns and everything like that. But I've got the main part of my animation worked out, and so now I've got the emotion. I could refine this a little bit, fine tune it before I go in and add my actual drawing. But that's what we'll do in the second part of class. For now, just focus on getting your basic emotion down, working out your main keyframes, getting something that you like. And then in the second part of class, we'll go in and we'll add the actual art, we'll add the in-betweens and everything else. One last thing, I'm just going to lock this pose to pose. I'm going to save, and I'll stop here.